Know, live, transform. This is 702. This is 702. For the curious.
Well, it's 3 minutes to 2 o'clock. We're joining Pippa Jarvis now, who's with us as the managing director of the TLC Children's Home. And this afternoon, we're focusing on adoption. World Adoption Day is is coming up in a matter of a couple of weeks. And when we think about adoption, we also have to extend our minds to the first 1,000 days. They are tremendously important because it is a time of great potential and enormous vulnerability for a child. In fact, from conception, and it lays down the foundation for the rest of a person's life. So consider for a moment the first 1,000 days of an abandoned baby. Around 6,000 babies a year are abandoned in South Africa. 6,000. So this afternoon, we're focusing on adoption and some of the various issues that come into play, but as well as abandoned babies and the system and how they move through it, and just some of the changes that we may need to consider in order to bring about a meaningful change in the lives of these children. Pippa, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you.
So much. It's an honor for that.
Oh, I'm worried about that line, Pippa. Yeah, let's try that again. I just want you to tell us more about TLC Children's Home. I think my producer is going to have to put Pippa on a better line. But she is the managing director of TLC Children's Home. And she herself, over the years, has adopted a number of children. So at some point, they were looking after 35 babies, and they used to place 70 babies a year. Now, sadly, they're down to placing 6 babies a year. So what is happening? What is going on that has reduced the numbers of adoptions so drastically? Pippa, I hope the line is much clearer. Hi.
Thanks. I hope that's better. I'm getting higher here for you. All right.
Right, that is much better. Okay. I was just relating TLC, some of the stats coming out of your organization, but in essence, what is it all about?
So we take care of predominantly abandoned children or infants who've been relinquished to the system either because their mother has died or she has decided to give the child up for adoption.
Yeah.
And yeah, as we said, we've placed over 900 children in families since we started. And, and that's a really necessary part of the support system for social services. And there seems to have been a real sort of reticence that's grown inside the system where the role players and the stakeholders who make the decisions have been disempowered by the rhetoric that's going on in the politics. And it's really a problem for babies who are now sitting in the system who now, if adoption is taken out of the options of their futures, end up in an institutional life for the rest of their lives.
For the rest of their lives. And we will look at that in a moment. But I just want to get a sense of how drastically these adoption levels have dropped.
Yeah, it's really a problem, Azania. So I think you'll know the statistics that local adoptions were only about 1,033 last year. International adoptions only 153. And that's the 2018-2019 period. Now you can imagine if your statistics are upwards of 3,500 to 6,000 babies abandoned a year, which doesn't include children who have been relinquished or removed from their families. Institutions like ours are chock-a-block with children who really are desperate for families, and we should be looking at every option for them, every possible option to let them grow up in families, because we know institutions are not good for children. We know that. I mean, it's around the world very common knowledge. But what do we do if there's not an option, a family option for them?
Yes, exactly.
So, we should all be collaborating, working together, finding a way to make sure that children aren't spending years of their life unnecessarily in institutions.
Just describe these institutions for us, Pippa, so that we get a sense of what these children grow up within, the environment that they grow up in.
So in the beginning, it's not such a, so I can only speak from my experience and then what I've seen in other places, around the country. We regard ourselves as a sort of a centre of excellence for babies and infants particularly, where we focus, like you said, on those 1,000 days, teaching them, or getting them properly attached to caregivers. And, it all comes at a massive emotional cost to people. But we have to do that. We have to teach our caregivers to love, with a view to let go, because that attachment in the beginning is so critical. But most institutions who aren't able to to provide that kind of stability of caregiver means that their children grow up with massive vulnerabilities and attachment, and it becomes a pattern of their life, of their life. And later on, when we need them to be productive adults and we need them to engage and form relationships with significant others, they just can't do it. They have no trust. They have no foundation for how to develop those relationships, and it's a massive amount of investment and therapy that needs to go into that. So we're really shooting ourselves in the foot by saying that, we're going to delay placing them with families, because later on you're going to end up with their families that are also dysfunctional.
Yeah.
You're just, perpetuating a system, and we need to break that cycle, and we need really strong, decisive leadership and collaboration around that.
Yeah. So what are some of the barriers that may have contributed to this kind of decline, especially as far as the process and the state of affairs is concerned?
So we started to see a decline very strongly when the rhetoric around the anti-colonial sentiment started. There was a lot of pushback towards things that were seen as westernized and colonial institutions. Or at least for the fundamental philosophies. And adoption was seen as one of those. So the idea of removing children from their communities of origin and placing them elsewhere was seen as a threat to the country, to the cultures, and disrespectful of their heritage.
When was that, Pippa?
Sure. This would have been maybe 3 or 4 years ago already, when that rhetoric started, where there started to be a disdain for adoptions, and particularly international adoptions. You'll remember that according to the Hague Convention and all of that, there's a strong regulation around international adoptions and placement. But there are several countries who haven't signed to the Hague Convention, and there we are having problems where adoptions break down. And they get a huge amount of negative publicity around how adoptions are failing children, and how, families aren't properly screened, and how children are stolen from their birth families and, and then removed from their cultures because of economic reasons. And of course, those problems exist, and I would not discount them. But South Africa is a signatory to the Hague Convention, and it is a hugely rigorous process that families who want to adopt go through in order to be able to place children with them. And I think that, we really need to look at the systems that do work and support those, and then deal with the things that happen outside of that. The same way you wouldn't treat everybody like a criminal. You rather want to support those that are behaving, and then, deal with the criminals in a separate system. I think that has to be looked at similarly, because otherwise we're literally throwing the baby out of the bathwater. So we put all these extra regulations and a sort of negative spin on adoption, and then the consequence is children living in institutions and not really getting the results you want. So yes, they're not in families, but the fact that they're not in families causes other problems.
Right. And what alternative has then been given in light of that pushback to say removing children from their various cultures is detrimental?
So, there's actually a lovely solution, and that would be to equip communities of origin to keep the children that are found there, children in their communities. But the reality is that in South Africa, we just don't have the resource right now. So it's definitely an ideal to work toward, where every family is capacitated to keep their children, and those that can take more should take more. But we don't have that system in place. So to put things like there's been this discussion around a moratorium of placing infants into children's homes so that they can rather go into foster care. That's a fantastic idea, but the fact of the matter is the foster care families are not available right now. And right now we have this crisis where there's thousands of children in children's homes. So we need to work together on a more sort of parallel solution, creating a proper safety net so that babies aren't lost in the system for years and years, because unfortunately their timing doesn't work,
Yes.
We're sitting with averages of 33 months in care, if you're lucky, for abandoned children. And these are newborn babies coming in and only potentially leaving care at 33 months, which is nearly 3 years old. And all those 1,000 days, all that investment is not, we've lost it, and society is going to be weaker for it. So we really need to fix that.
Yeah. So, and I know that you believe that babies should be, especially abandoned babies, should be all babies. But we're talking because you take in abandoned babies, that they should be adopted as soon as possible.
Absolutely. And I'm not saying, don't be careful with the system. The system is there to protect the children. But what I am saying is that there are places where the system is broken. For example, a child who gets abandoned, we are waiting on average 8 months for a birth certificate for those babies, if we're lucky. 8 months. And by which time that child is closer to a year, and you know how people are. If they want to adopt a child, they're looking to adopt as young as possible because they understand the value of those 1,000 days. So every child and every child that comes in that placement is delayed because of obstructions in bureaucracy and red tape, is a potential drain on the system for their entire life because nobody's facilitating that process. So those sorts of things, court dates that get postponed for months on end because social workers haven't done what they're supposed to do. DSD, is really, unfortunately, got a massive, massive backlog with children and their caseloads. And so we're sitting with places where the social worker will arrive at court and she won't have included one particular document in the file, and then the whole case gets delayed for another 2 months. So where the child was 10 months, now she'll be a year. Then the court closes in December, so she'll only get her case in next year. All those delays, they say, no, we need to deal with those. Those absolutely cannot be allowed to continue if we have any hope of saving this generation.
I can only imagine some of the other complications when it comes to a birth certificate, acquiring a birth certificate, because a baby can only be adopted with a birth certificate. And then you look at some of the circumstances under which some of the abandoned babies are born.
Look, statelessness is a huge issue in our particular sector, where babies are born and there's an assumption that they are born to foreign families. And so then to try and access the South African birth certificate has taken massive legal work by the Lawyers for Human Rights. They started a statelessness project in 2011, and they've been working really, really closely with organizations like ours to try and sort of ease this, this terrible obstacle in the way. In fact, there was a huge finding, a judgment in April 2019 it was a court case that was held where brothers needed birth certificates. Their parents were from Angola, but they had lived here all their lives. And thankfully, because of judgments like that then agreed that they should be, eligible for South African citizenship, they have now an opportunity to live a free life where they can access the kind of work and education and things that they should be. And every one of our babies deserves that, not necessarily to claim citizenship, but to at least have the right to exist. We've got babies here 3 years old who don't exist because they haven't even been issued with a handwritten birth certificate, never mind a South African one. That stuff, it's just not acceptable. People like to throw around statistics like 500,000 children in care in South Africa or 3.5 million orphans in the country. Every single one of those numbers is a living, breathing, desperate person who wants to belong to a family, who wants a community, who wants a country. And if we're not doing something about that, then we are setting ourselves up for destruction.
Pippa, let's take a break, and we're going to take your calls, your comments on what you've heard in this conversation around adoption, around the dire state of adoption in this country, particularly pertaining to abandoned babies. Pippa Jarvis, the managing director of the TLC Children's Home, and Pippa herself has adopted 14 children herself in her personal capacity, beyond, of course, those that have been taken in by TLC over the years. 011-883-0702, 31702 for your SMSs.
702. Azania Mosaka. Lines are always open on 011-883. 0702.
It's 7 minutes to 2 o'clock, and we've been in conversation with Pippa Jarvis, Managing Director for TLC Children's Home, talking about adoption because we are seeing declining numbers. So what has caused this? What has led us to a situation where millions of children in this country continue to languish within the state institution, various facilities within the state system? Some of your questions, Pippa, I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer these, but one says, I'd like to ask if it's possible for a single person to adopt, or rather a single man. And would I be allowed to adopt a girl child as a man? I always have wanted to adopt. This comes from Jay in Alberton. What is your answer to Jay?
Yes, definitely. Anybody older than 18 can adopt, whether they're married, single, or in relationships with other people. And we would always advise that you can check out the website at www.adoption.org.za, and it'll guide you through it. It will indicate which agencies can help you with that, and then you go through the process. And it takes between 6 and 18 months, usually, from start to finish, and you can stipulate whether or not you prefer a boy or a girl. You can't usually stipulate a specific child. Unless you've got a pre-existing relationship with them. But usually you can give a good guideline of what you're interested in, and then we're desperate for families, so please consider it. If you are resourceful enough and you've got a heart for children, please consider going through the process. I know it can be difficult, and there are a lot of support groups and people who can help you walk that journey, but please, the babies, they need families.
Yeah.
The family looks like everything. So
I think we also need to talk about what happens when the child turns 18, especially those that didn't get adopted, that have been raised within the state system.
Yeah, sure. So it's a huge challenge for institutions at the moment, and places where children are aging out of care, where they're having to put in care leaving programs to try and facilitate and equip, the children who have been raised in institutions, because they haven't received the same kind of social grounding that a child in a family would regularly have, and they don't have the access to a support network the same way a child in a family or community would have. So they need other things. They need facilitation, and there's huge work being done by UJ Social Work Department. Professor Adrian van Breda is a real groundbreaker in all of this, where he is putting together a real body of evidence and research about what are the factors that will help care leavers succeed. And I think that that's a really positive thing for our country to look at doing, and not only for care leavers, but in a lot of organizations or communities where there's a huge amount of youth. There are real learnings we can share across the board there.
Yes, because as you say, they leave without maybe some of the skills, some of the what you mentioned earlier about being able to connect and attach to other human beings. And they're saddled with that as they move into this independent life with very little as a safety net.
Absolutely. And you can imagine, just from a cultural perspective, in an African scenario where you marry, for example, and there's an expectation on your family, either the bride or the groom family, to be participating in that. If you come from an institutional background where there is nobody that you call your own, or nobody calls you their own, it actually causes massive problems in your relationship and your potential as a partner. And these are things we really need to look at. South Africa has such a beautiful spirit around Ubuntu and the idea of, we embracing each other. And we need to get back to that, Azania. We need to find a way that communities recognize that the children in their communities are theirs for good. And to embrace that with love and not just with disdain or resentment.
Let's listen out to this voice note, Pippa.
Sure.
Hi, Azania. Jenny G. A very good friend fostered a child who'd been in an institution for the first 11 years of her life. And the issues that she's having now with this child entering in her teenage years are huge. And basically because the child brought up herself. So it's understandable from the child's point of view, but goodness me, can you imagine if they were able to get that child when she was in her foundational years and put the stamp of the family right then and there in place? We should be doing everything to speed up this process. Cheers, bye.
Thank you for that, Jenny. But how do we support, especially, even the term, I hate the term, aging out of care. These are still young people, but how do we better support them when there hasn't been an adoption?
Yeah, wow. So it does require a real collaboration between healthcare workers, education providers, and general social service, and the community at large. Employers need to recognize even that children who come in from a care situation are used to things being done for them. They, in a lot of ways, aren't equipped with the same kind of independence skills that a child who's been raised in a family would have. So simple things. I was faced with a situation the other day where a child who had been raised in the same institution all his life had only ever seen one way that lights switch on and off, and that doors open and close, like the handles only looked a particular way in this institution. And when he went out, he spoke of how awful it was to suddenly realize that actually lights can be switched on and off in 100 different ways. The switches look different, and that you can. So just simple, basic things that suddenly become a trauma to these children. And we need to be able to embrace them. And so this is something I have a bit of a peeve about, Azania, is this idea that we protect children by hiding them behind the walls of institutions. So, there's this big thing around we don't disclose any information around children in care to protect their own interests. But actually what it does is it removes their humanity from the community. If the community has to come to them then it's a very like one-directional relationship. It's very much like I'm coming to do my community service type of mindset.
Yeah.
Whereas if we are able to bring the children forward into the community, so let them be present in the community, you create a much more relational, kind of scenario where people recognize the value that these human beings have. And if we don't share the good stories of organizations like ours, and instead we are prevented from sharing any of that, then the world always functions with their mindset of what an orphan looks like. And, you end up with those sort of scenarios where people always look down at someone who's raised in an institution. And again, it's something society needs to change.
Absolutely, Pippa.
We need to be transparent.
Yeah, we are out of time, but I just want to get a quick comment from Paul in Fourways. Paul, you've got 20 seconds. Hello, Paul?
Yes, hi, Azania. Hi.
Yes, hi, you've got 20 seconds, now 10.
Right, 20 seconds. I'm a father of 3 beautiful children who we adopted, my wife and I just wanted to say 2 things. 2 of them actually did come through TLC, and the amount of love and care that these guys present to our children is just it's a gift we can't ever thank them enough for. The main point I wanted to make is something that I think Pippa has already mentioned, is this is such a uniquely South African need. And in the spirit of Ubuntu, we really can solve this need. And we just need to get out of the way of allowing the people, whether it's the children's homes or the parents and the children, to be united and live in fully functional, loving families.
Right. Paul, thank you so much for your call. And Pippa, thank you for the work that you do and affording us time this afternoon.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity.
Your website, Pippa?
TLC.org.za.
Thank you very much. That's Pippa Jarvis, Managing Director of the TLC Children's Home. Warrior Pain.